Thankfully, we have a truly impressive Brandeis International Business School alumni working at these institutions. And they have very generously agreed to join us today and to share their thoughts. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to mention that this event is co-sponsored by the International Business Schools Asset Management Council and the Perlmutter Institute for Global Business Leadership. Our sincere thanks go out to the entire Asset Management Council, its chairman Perry Traquina, for all the work they've done in support of the Trends in Asset Management series. Our sincere gratitude especially goes out to Louis and Barbara Perlmutter, who generously founded the International Business School's Perlmutter Institute for Global Business Leadership. The Perlmutter Institute prepares students for leadership positions in global corporations. The Institute also explores the intersection of business, the global economy, government, and civil society. Louis Perlmutter is a Brandeis University graduate and a member of our Board of Trustees, and Barbara Perlmutter is a member of our International Business School Board of Advisors. Thank you for your enduring support. Now, to introduce our speakers and our moderator. Joining us today are alumni Andrea Dore, Elida Reci, and Olaf Unteroberdoerster. Andrea and Elida are graduates of the International Business School's Master of Arts in International Economics and Finance program, while Olaf is a graduate of our Master of Science in Finance program and our PhD program in International Economics and Finance. And moderating today, we have a special guest, Professor Linda Bowie, our Senior Associate Dean. She is standing in for Peter Petrie, whose internet went out this morning. So thank you, Linda, for stepping in at the last minute. Okay, now I'd like to tell you a little bit about our speakers, quickly dive into their background. Andrea Dore is the head of funding in the Capital Markets and Investments Department of the World Bank. Andrea's current responsibilities include managing the bank's funding program and strategy in several major currency markets and emerging markets. She is responsible for the issuance of the World Bank's benchmark bonds in a wide range of currencies and markets. Additionally, Andrea worked on setting up the infrastructure for the World Bank Green Bond Program. She also managed several projects focused on strengthening the controls and monitoring of operational risk across the World Bank's financing complex. Elida Reci is an economist working for the United Nations Department for Social and Economic Affairs. She is a regular contributor to several UN publications where she has written on issues related to digital transformation, frontier technologies, innovation, climate change, and sustainable development. Elida's work has taken her around the globe, where she has contributed to institutional and regulatory frameworks on sustainable development. Prior to joining the UN, Elida worked as a senior economic advisor to the Prime Minister of Albania and as director of the Albanian Ministry of Finance. Olaf Unteroberdoerster is currently a division chief in the International Monetary Fund's Finance Department. The lending capacity of Olaf's areas of responsibility at the IMF total about 1 trillion. He previously worked on the fund's resources and lending for the benefit of about 70 low-income member countries. Prior to joining the Finance Department, Olaf worked in the IMF's Middle East, Asia and Pacific, and Strategy, Policy, and Review departments. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, our moderator is Professor Linda Bowie. She is the Senior Associate Dean of the International Business School, and she is standing in for Peter Petrie, the founding dean. Linda Bowie does research in environmental economics, industrial organization, and public economics. She was a member of the EPA Science Advisory Board Council on the Economy-Wide Modeling and Environmental Justice, and she is also a member of the EPA Science Advisory Board's Scientific and Technological Achievements Awards Committee. Her current research focuses on the effect of environmental regulation and health outcomes. So Andrea, Elida, Olaf, and Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. I will now offer the floor to our moderator, Professor Bowie.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you this afternoon, and I'm particularly excited to be here at this event with our 3 wonderful guests to discuss, obviously, a set of issues that are incredibly important to all of us and affect us all in very, very different ways. And I think that that's really important to give a lot of thought to. So thank you very much, Andrea, Olaf, Elida, thank you for being here with us. So let me start our conversation this afternoon by asking each of you to think back about the really surreal months of January, February, and March of 2020, ask you, when did you and your institution recognize the scale of this crisis? And how did you mobilize to respond to it? So let me start with Andrea.
Thanks, Professor, and thanks and good evening, good afternoon to everyone who joined this call, and a shout out to my class of 98. I think the best cohort of Brandeis. In response to your question, in terms of when did we really recognize the scale of the crisis, it's interesting because on a personal level, I remember sometime in March when we were at work, and we were told that I would be working from home from now on. And obviously, we've had the discussion on COVID, and we have seen the implications. We were looking what was happening abroad. But I guess the scale of the crisis really recognize the scale of the crisis, maybe more around, not until say March, that's when we realized the magnitude. In fact, in early March, the World Bank announced the first initial response. At that time, it was 12 billion to assist countries then to address the emergency health response. By mid-March, that number had increased to say $14 billion. But by the end of March, that commitment was expanded to $160 billion. So you could see, recognizing the magnitude of the crisis, the bank had to set up fairly quickly. There is no sort of training book or any training manual for this, fairly, because the magnitude of this crisis, fairly quickly, a dedicated COVID fast track facility, which what it allowed at the beginning of April, the first group of projects, the bank was able to roll out funding to the first 25 countries. That emergency, obviously, like I said, it's nothing that people were expecting that magnitude. The response had to be continued. And in fact, the first response reached, say, probably about 70% of the population. I've been working at the World Bank since I graduated in 1998, and I have seen several crises, and I haven't seen the speed and magnitude of this response that we've seen for COVID-19. This has been unprecedented. The bank, fortunately, took fast, comprehensive actions that really help save lives and protect the vulnerable. In fact, as you mentioned, that I head the funding team at the World Bank, and basically that's the team that raised funds for the bank in the capital market. A lot of people know the bank for the development work, but we have a huge operation, because all the funding that the bank provides to countries actually, even though backed by our shareholders in terms of providing equity into the institution, but we raise all this funding in the capital market. And we had to raise an extraordinary amount of funding in a very quick period of time in the capital market. In fact, in April alone, we raised $15 billion in 8 days. This includes one transaction of $8 billion US. This is the largest bond ever issued by a multilateral institution. Last year alone, we generally raise between 40 to 50 billion. We raised for IBRD and IDA, the bank raised $80 billion across 20 plus currency globally. This is an unprecedented amount. This is the highest ever in the bank's 75-year plus history. So, the crisis, like you mentioned, really recognized the magnitude, but the response, and it required a very quick and massive response.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. Olaf, what about the IMF?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be back, even only virtually. And I also want to thank Andrea and Elida for joining the panel. I'd like to start the first question a bit more from a personal perspective, I can talk more about the IMF response later on. But when did I realize that this was a big crisis? When did the institution realize that this was a big crisis? I was preparing in early 2020 for a major review of the IMF's reserves and preparing an analysis to be provided to the board on the credit risk that the IMF had been taking prior to this crisis. And I was hearing a bit of background noise on the spread of the virus starting from January. And I was also aware that some of my colleagues in the research department were preparing board briefings, but I considered these more like distractions. I was really focused on getting my own major policy review ready to be presented to the board. But then I had 2 staff members who were on leave in China, and suddenly I became personally involved in evacuating them and getting them back safely to Washington, DC. And I remember vividly one weekend in early February where I was constantly on a line with one staff member. She managed to get on the last flight of United Airlines from Beijing to Washington. And she managed to get into Washington just hours before the previous administration imposed a travel ban from China. And I realized this is a big one. I have to pay attention to this. And the next day, I continued to prepare for this review of reserves. We issued the paper to the board. I began to have background calls with our external relations people. And just days before the board meeting, the IMF started working from home. Initially, it was a trial exercise. I remember we were all sent home Friday, March 13. For Saturday, March 14, we were told this is not just a trial. You will be working from home for the time being. On Monday, March 16, I was continuing to have preparations and press calls on this review. 2 hours later, we decided the events will be so important, we cannot continue with a review that pretends this is business as usual. We pulled the board meeting, we pulled all the press releases. And within hours, we focused on fighting the pandemic, and more on that later. But it was really impressive to see how quickly we then shifted gears at all levels.
Thank you, Olaf. Yes, I think we all have these personal stories about when it really dawned on us that this was the big one. Elida, what about the UN? You're still muted, Elida. There we go.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's very lovely to be here back at Brandeis after almost 18 months together with Andrea and Olaf. Thank you, Dean Katie and former Dean Petrie, for making it possible. I can't believe it was actually only 18 months. We were there celebrating our anniversary. A big greeting, joining Andrea in greeting my classmates whose links to Brandeis do not show that close as ours, but I'm sure in spirit they are always with us and following us whenever they can. What Olaf was saying, it kind of really deeply resonates with many of us, especially the one, like the part of the UN that I work is headquarter based. It's secretariat. Much should have happened in the field for us to kind of have a response, for which you need to build global consensus, not the easiest one. So it came initially through family links. My mother lives in Italy, where I'm right now, allowed it by my office to work remotely. So Italy, Northern Italy, start feeling it pretty much. It was the first spot in Europe. So I knew something big was coming, But honestly, in the office, we all were carrying our own work. We had a publication that measures e-government readiness of all the UN members. We were at the very last stages, so we were really running to finish it. But I knew, because I couldn't really take the proper sleep, I would kind of stay up to 2 o'clock, 2 at midnight, to wait for my mother to know she was doing well, and trying to convince my brother to separate and not see her, which was quite unusual. But to go back, the UN, initially they were part of the UN, especially the Security Council, the General Assembly, where quite a lot was happening in terms of, especially least developed countries, raising concern that any stop to the flight and to the trade might highly affect them. And they were feeling it in late January, early February. It was until mid-March, as Olaf mentioned, that we were told, you need to experiment working 3 days from home, and then we'll see how it goes. In 75 plus years of the UN, it never happened that you could have something online. And it was thought that the last place on earth to kind of go on total shutdown would be the Secretariat. You need the Security Council, you need the General Assembly. It looks like the world cannot function without that. It did, in fact, function, because UN is not just the Secretariat and the part that I happen to work. We're talking about a large organization with over 30 development funds and agency, and sometimes we do include Bretton Woods institution. I know Olaf and Andrea, you don't love us so much, and sometimes we don't, but in general, we are all part of the global system, so to speak. In February, the Secretary General did recognize, getting his briefing, did recognize that we are heading on something that we haven't experienced before. It was the time of the reflection for the UN at the 75th year of its life, and we were really looking on how we are going to reshape, especially the development segment of the UN. We have seen the first special envoy of the UN on financing for development being appointed for the first time. And in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, I'm being called to stop the work on the UN e-government survey, because the UN was organizing for the first time in 75 years ago, the high-level conference on financing during COVID and post-COVID. It was an initiative of the Secretary General, the Prime Minister of Canada, and the President of Jamaica, which was to be organized by 28th of May last year. And that kick-started the work on a number of pillars, which I will detail later. Thank you.
Thank you, Elida. So, Andrea, over the year, the shock became clear, can you give us some concrete examples of how countries were affected and how the bank helped? So what innovations emerged in the bank in this period?
Yeah, it's in fact, the bank, since the COVID periods started, the bank have rolled out programs in more than 100 developing countries. COVID, has really dealt a major blow to the poorest countries. The pandemic, what has happened has really compounded, the challenges that, developing countries had already facing. The unfortunate thing is that the heaviest burden of the pandemic has really fallen on, those vulnerable countries. In fact, most of you know in some of the grid statistics that we had even before the crisis, that we have 40% of the world population that live on just $1.50 a day. That's over 3 billion people. You have over 9% of the world population that live in extreme poverty. That means, living on $1.9 a day. And we are already in a bad situation when you look at from that, institutions like, the UN, the World Bank, IMF, the multilateral institution was working towards, the UN development goals and trying to, and then all of a sudden you have a pandemic like this. And the estimate from this, there's an estimate from this that this pandemic will push 150 million additional people into extreme poverty. In fact, my colleagues suggested that extreme poverty worldwide will increase for the first time since 20 years. So the bank have really, in terms of like your question is how have the bank helped during that period? Apart from, I could probably give, some more specific examples, the bank, the scale of the crisis, the bank had to find creative ways to quickly mobilize and redirect funding to countries. So countries could access, particularly, it started first as a health crisis to access critical health supplies. The bank had to come up with some innovative ideas in terms of helping facilitate procurement on behalf of countries, like bank facilitate procurement. What does that mean? Where the bank assisted countries in negotiating contracts with supplier and manufacturer to ensure more equitable access to scarce supply. We all remember, trying to get masks, trying to get PPE, and how scarce those resources were, and trying to help negotiate on country behalf to avoid price gouging. The bank helped countries increase the bandwidth so that they could continue critical public services such healthcare, mobile payment, delivery, e-commerce. The bank worked with government in the private sector and other partners, because it's a global, to repurpose and accelerate energy operation. And that was important to provide, say, clean, reliable, and affordable energy to be able to connect hospitals and other critical facilities. Testing laboratories, cold storage for vaccine. So there are a lot of areas that the bank really helped to try to scale up, say, the social safety network. I'm from an island in the Caribbean called St. Lucia. We're not fortunate in the developed countries that have that social network where government could just send out checks. The bank worked very closely. Like some examples, like I could probably give you a few examples. Say, for instance, in Pakistan, the bank provided $25 million in emergency cash transfer. And this went to about 4 million people under some national safety net, assisting in providing food for the poor. The bank worked with countries, say, like Malawi, to provide support when it comes to home-based school. That was a challenge. People were not set up. Even the international institution, we weren't even set up at home, to trade, and we were scrambling. So you could imagine those countries that do not have facilities. Kids don't have, laptops. They don't have, those digital devices that we have. In Turkey, the bank provided help in terms of safe schooling. They were providing help in the countries in terms of different channels through television, internet, radio. So there are so many examples where the bank had to step up its operations. There are countries, like I said, at the beginning, it seems like a health crisis. Like coming from St. Lucia, that's there really depends on tourism, and you have all of a sudden all the borders are shut. It's estimated that GDP in the island will shrink by 20%. So the bank, had to step up. St. Lucia was also one of the beneficiaries in terms of helping in terms of some of the social safety net. So these are a few examples of some of the things that the bank, but like I said, we could probably go on and on and on, but I think, that's not, so I'll pass that out to you.
So I think there are lots of dimensions of what could really be some of the issues that come up. So in terms of ramping up, Olaf, what needs did the fund identify, and how did it adjust or invent new programs and have the scale and the speed of interventions to meet the needs? And do you think that your innovations are going to have value in the future, which I think is a really important question?
Thanks, Linda. Yes, the fund's lending is generally considered very flexible. The fund basically just has two facilities, one for short-term BOP needs and one for longer-term BOP needs. But we realized quite quickly that we needed to change a few things, and we needed to do this quickly. So the fund looked at a tool that it had not used a lot in the past, and that was a rapid financing instrument, which is a tool that addresses urgent BOP needs with essentially very little conditionality. The interesting thing here is that we changed policies while at the same time we were already accepting requests and inquiries for assistance. Usually, it can take a long time to change a policy, and after it is changed, countries may request assistance under this policy. What was new here is we did this on parallel tracks at the same time. And so we looked at this emergency financing facility, increased access levels to this facility, and we streamlined approval procedures. And I remember that we brought all these policy changes to the board, and the board decided on those, approved those in a very short period. And literally the next day, the board got the first requests from countries for financing under this emergency facility for approval. And in the end, we, within a few months since the onset of the pandemic, we provided assistance under this emergency facility to 85 countries for a total of over $110 billion. And just by comparison, before the crisis, we would maybe help 3 or 4 countries in any given year under this facility. So we, it was increased manifold, and also many low-income countries benefited under this facility. 51 low-income countries benefited, and the capacity for subsidized lending at 0 interest rates under this facility was increased 5-fold within a short period. We also adopted a completely new facility, the short-term liquidity line, which is a precautionary facility for emerging markets and advanced economies with strong institutions. It's basically a precautionary credit line. And this facility was discussed within the IMF and at the board over years, repeatedly. And only in this crisis, finally, there was sufficient support and a view in the membership. Yes, we also need this and we want this now. And it was adopted in a very short period of time. Fortunately, and thanks to the massive interventions by leading central banks, the ECB and the Fed, global financial conditions eased relatively quickly, beginning in April and May. And so this facility remained in the toolbox, but was not used. So I think what happened here in the first phase was really a roundabout tackling of policy issues and also operational issues to really get the money flowing to countries that needed it. And there was a widespread need. Then a few months later, over the summer, we also started work on revamping the toolkit on a longer term basis. We started thinking about what would be the phases of the pandemic, the stabilization phase, the recovery phase, and addressing long-term structural needs. And work began on a pandemic facility that would have allowed for much longer repayment terms, addressing long-term structural needs, something that the IMF had never done before. I have to say that those discussions are still ongoing, and so far there has been insufficient support for these reforms. But I think the work was still worthwhile, because as we are gradually coming out of this pandemic, The focus is now shifting to the longer term challenges that pre-existed the COVID pandemic, in particular climate change and supporting countries for climate adaptation. And so the work that has gone into these facilities might well become relevant again as we address those issues.
Thank you, Olaf. That's actually going to bring up a question that if we have time later on, I will ask you about. But Elida, the UN's role is more to mobilize governments to act rather than to offer direct support. And what do you think are the most important accomplishments in 2020? And where do you think the UN came up short? You're muted still, Elida. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Linda. It's quite important to mention that once again, we have this coordinating role, and we are practically from the global to the country level through our UN country offices. So the UN response was not only multi-sectoral, multi-layeral, but it was from the global to the national level as well. What we had quite, UN at that point of time was working on what we would call in a system-wide approaches to the future of health, to the future of education, to the future of work, to the future of food. All of those were somehow taken into consideration when we'll be from the 2019, 2020 and onward in terms of what we are now experiencing in about 1 year time. So it was in a way being mobilized through the same teams in multi-UN agencies approaches to address very critical issues. So far, we have helped 155 million children, ensuring that they continue their education. There are 1.9 million community health workers that have been through the UN entities that have received training and are now in the first line of response. We have deployed over 100 emergency teams in over 90 countries, and we have helped 20 million people to ensure access to water and hygiene. Those are very few numbers if you go, because as I mentioned, it's somehow difficult to kind of have the update on the contribution of the UN entities at all levels. I would like to just say that thanks to the cooperation with Bretton Woods Institution, as mentioned by Andrea and by Olaf, countries have been able to ensure access to internet, to get some kind of support to the health system, and to ensure that the food delivery was there somehow, the humanitarian help was there, and that for our UN system extend to the refugee camps, etc. So if I would sum up the UN response somehow, I would say that it was a health response, which the benefits of whom we all have seen despite quite critical standing has been led by WHO. It was the peace operation that have been led by Security Council resuming the work very quickly through the online by ensuring at the same time the needed level of security. Humanitarian response, and the one that I'm more familiar because my office is in charge within the UN Secretariat, is the framework for immediate social and economic response. I would like to highlight what Andrea mentioned, that we're talking about 1,200 people dying, not out of COVID, but out of hunger. ILO is estimating that will be about over 500 million jobs lost only in 2020. So we're talking about widening economic inequalities to a level we haven't seen it before. The reference initially in March, April was made to the levels of 1998, but we are way past that level, and we're still looking for a reference to which to kind of show, because the numbers are coming. it is clear that we need quite a lot of funding, which somehow gets estimated in the trillion rather than billions. What we need to make sure is that we have that political leadership in there to allow for this global response to get into place. And that's what my office has been doing somehow, supporting the Secretary General's effort in ensuring that the political leadership is there. And we have seen how critical such is. So what started in May 2020 was just discussing on 6 pressing issues. And the first one is the need to expand liquidity in the global economy and maintain financial stability to safeguard development gains, if any, and strengthen the recovery for current and future generations. So that is something that we have started last year. It's going to continue in the years to come. There is a need to address debt vulnerabilities, and that has been led by the IMF with over 20 other UN entities collaborating on this matter to ensure that all developing countries in need are taking full benefit of the current debt instruments that are managed by both bank and the IMF, but also the introduction of the new instrument and replenishing it. Along with that, there has been a highly expressed need by the least and developing countries, but along with them also the middle income countries in renegotiating the terms of debt. Those are still discussion ongoing. The instruments and modalities are still subject of discussions. But again, that is highly needed to support the funding needed for immediate and short-term response. There is a need to create, as I mentioned, space for private sector creditors so they can be engaged in effective and timely solution. In order to avoid a disorderly wave of defaults. The prerequisite for enhancing external finance for inclusive growth, gender equality, creating jobs, those seems to have been more of long-term financing, but now they are at the forefront, especially lowering the transaction costs for migrant remittances, which has been critical for over 90 countries, UN members in different levels of development. The fifth one was measures to expand fiscal space and foster domestic resource mobilization by preventing illicit financial flow, base erosion, profit shifting, and facilitating contribution of the digital economy, which I've seen how critical it has been in the past year. The sixth one, but that somehow gets also threaded into all the first 5, is the green recovery, ensuring that whatever we do from now on, it's a great opportunity to do it in a sustainable and inclusive way by aligning policies not only with sustainable development goals, but with Paris Agreement and Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. In terms of the timelines, I hope I'm not taking much time. In terms of the timeline, that meeting that took place in May was followed by the meeting of September of the Ministers of Finance, the first time that they came to the UN Secretariat. Usually, as we know, they go for spring and fall meetings only in DC. The other one was the meeting of heads of state, ensuring that the president and the prime ministers are fully aware and committed to whatever technical teams and political teams are there. That led to a kickstart of what we know now as COVAX, which is the instrumental partnership in ensuring that the vaccine are distributed to the countries around the world through the pledges and the donation given by not only the government of the developed countries, but also the private sector and the foundations. I have much more to say, but I'm stopping here.
Well, I do want to save some time for our questions and answers. So let me ask the 3 of you the following. We're not done with COVID yet. We would like to be, but we're not. So very briefly, what grade would you give to the international system for its response so far? And maybe more importantly, COVID was just a shot across the bow. This is not going to be the first pandemic that we could face, possibly in our lifetime. Are we ready for the next crisis? I mean, something that is very clear from all of your responses is that the World Bank, the UN, the IMF, you all responded very, very rapidly in ways that we haven't seen before. Countries are going to expect that same response rate, perhaps even during non-pandemics, non-crises. Are we ready for the next one? Andrea, would you like to start with that one?
You know, what grade would I give? I guess the initial response, like I said, like, you know, I've been in the bank for 2 decades now, and I haven't seen that level, you know, that mobilization, that quick, you know, massive scale of response. So on that basis, I believe, you know, that, you know, those institutions, the World Bank does deserve a high grade for the initial response. What's a high grade? I guess, you know, the European high grade might be very different to the US grade, but I think we're unable to provide kind of a final grade, you know, because the goal is to really, you know, whilst this is a short-term, it seems like a short-term crisis, but it's not, because it has, you know, long-term implication. So we need to see how, you know, some of the policies that have been rolled out in these countries, and how we could sort of build back better and greener. You know, are we ready for the next crisis? You know, while we can never be fully prepared, you know, for the next crisis, it could be very different. But I do believe that the experience that we have gained through, whether it's through, you know, the financial crisis, through Ebola, and now COVID, will definitely help us in terms of dealing with the next crisis. One thing we've learned, at least with COVID, that, you know, we require solutions that are scalable, you know, to deal with the crisis, the magnitude of the crisis, solutions that promote resilience, an opportunity for the people that are impacted the most, which are the poor people. This crisis will put families back by decades. So we need a recovery that will deliver, you know, growth. It's robust, it's inclusive, and something that's sustainable. We always hear the phrase, building back better and greener. And Elida talked about climate change. This is not just a phrase, because, you know, it's very important, particularly climate change, bring it in the discussion, because, you know, poverty, food security, all of those things are exacerbated because of climate change.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so we cannot ignore, you know, those changes. So I think our response needs to be multi-dimensional. So I really think that, you know, the tools that we learned from this crisis, you know, would prepare us for the next crisis.
So before I have Olaf respond, I've been asked to let the audience know, if you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer box for us. And we'll just keep our responses pretty short so we can save a little bit of time for those questions that have come up. So Olaf, please, what do you think?
Yes, thanks, Linda. I don't want to give this response a grade, but I would start by saying it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, but I would also like to say, let's remember where we were coming from. Organizations like the International Monetary Fund can only be as strong and as effective as the membership wants them to be. And in early 2020, multilateralism and international organizations were pretty much under attack in this country and elsewhere. Nationalism was on the rise. And against this backdrop, to see this response and also to see how the membership came together and worked through these organizations to address this global pandemic was a very encouraging thing to see. In the end, I mean, up to now, again, for the IMF, we have made commitments of nearly $300 billion so far. That is a good chunk of the IMF's total lending capacity of $1 trillion. Clearly, we can do more, and just you know, maybe to give you an idea what we can do more, just yesterday we had a board meeting and executive directors expressed strong support for a plan and asked the IMF staff to make a specific proposal to allocate the IMF's special drawing rights to the membership. This is a tool that only the IMF has. It's used very rarely. The last time a general allocation of reserve assets in the form of SDRs was done after the global financial crisis. And after a year of debate, it seems that there is now willingness to consider a formal proposal by staff for another general allocation, which could be to the tune of $650 billion and which would provide immediate relief to many of the poorest and many of the liquidity constrained countries in the world. So not a perfect response, but we are also not over this crisis yet. We can do more. And I'm quite optimistic that we will, in the end, do more. And I also believe that if there's one lesson from this pandemic, you ask, are we ready for the next crisis? I think the one lesson is that nobody should believe that these types of crises, and there will be more like these in the future, that these global challenges can be tackled without international organizations, without the UN, the World Bank, or the IMF.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go on to some of the questions because we're going to run out of time. And the first question from the audience is the following. What steps are the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF taking to better prepare themselves for future such widespread viruses or disease? So Elida, I'd like you to try and respond to that one first.
Yes, thank you, Linda. I think the UN financing response to the crisis and beyond has seen multi-layer, multi-plan, encompassing responses that are prepared through a multitude of high-level and ongoing pledges and financial commitments. However, COVID-19 pandemic is more than a health crisis. It's an economic crisis, humanitarian crisis, security crisis, and human rights crisis. And the crisis has highlighted severe fragilities and inequalities within and among nations. Coming out of this crisis will require a whole of government, a whole of society, and a whole of the world approach driven by compassion and solidarity. We at the UN, while we are carrying daily work in delivering a global response that leaves no one behind, including starting with distribution of the vaccine, we're trying at the same time to work on reducing our vulnerability to future pandemics. And that comes by strengthening our institutions and their capacities to respond to such crises. We've noted that leaving the WHO underfunded had a critical impact to the UN capacity to respond to this crisis. But at the same time, we realized that adopting a whole of a system approach in which multiple agency collaboration was needed made us overcome these obstacles. So we'll work much more on that. We do understand that we also need to build resilience to future shocks, and especially as it was highlighted by Andrea on climate change. We need to work and look at the challenges that we have ahead, not only as health crisis again, but with a very strong emphasis on the other crises and with a threat on climate change in all of them. Only in this way, UN will be able to somehow overcome the severe and systematic inequalities that were exposed by this pandemic.
Thank you, Elida. We have another question from the audience, and it says, I don't trust the leadership in many of these countries. How can we get comfortable in the future of future payments getting to their intended humanitarian uses? Andrea, would you like to give a shot at that one?
Yeah, the question of, whether it's transparency, debt transparency, I know the UN, IMF and the World Bank have been working a lot on that. making sure in the countries that the money is used for the intended, the purpose is intended. One of the things that the bank have offices, although our headquarters is in Washington, have offices in over 100 countries. To be able to be on the ground, to have direct, dialogue with the country, there will always be, challenges. There's no doubt there'll be challenges. Maybe with, the emergence of this big into sort of fintech and emerging technologies and blockchain, and whether, we'll be able to use some of those emerging technologies to be able to track and trace, payments to make sure it get to the intended. But I think a lot of work in terms of transparency, a lot of work has been done over the decades. A crisis makes it more difficult because you have, quick, response, quick tracking. But I do believe that, the bank will continue to work under multilateral institutions as well.
Thank you, Andrea. So I have a question, and we know, as I said, that this is not going to be the first one, and you mentioned that we don't have a training book. We have 3 minutes left, so I wanted to ask the following. Do we now have a training book? Do we now have in each of your institutions something set up so that you know what to do, you know what steps to take when the next big thing hits? Olaf, do you want to give that one a shot? And you've got 3 minutes.
I would like to give some space also to Andrea and Elida, but I think for the IMF, this is maybe relatively easy to answer because the IMF is essentially a firefighting institution at the center of the global financial safety net. The IMF was designed to address economic and financial crisis. And while this is a health crisis in the first instance, it is also an economic and financial crisis, and that's where the IMF came in. I mean, when I joined in '98, it was at the height of the Asian financial crisis. Then we went through a tranquil period. Then we had the global financial crisis, and we saw that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Then I was personally involved in setting up a trust fund for catastrophe containment, and that was in the wake of the Ebola crisis in Africa that didn't make such big headlines in the world, but it was still an important crisis, and the tools we developed there have also helped us now. Elida has already mentioned the debt suspension service initiative, and this trust is also helping in this area. And now we have the pandemic. We will have future crises. We will probably have to deal also with more regional crises, with natural disasters, with climate-related events that have a bearing on the economy and financial systems. I think we will, in general, always be ready as IMF to fight these crises. But again, I think in the big scheme of things, for universal multilateral organizations like ours, what is important is that there is a common purpose, that there are shared values, and that the member countries realize that there are things, that there are global challenges that can only be tackled jointly, and that nationalism and country-first strategies are a dead end in this world.
Olaf, thank you. I would like to thank all three of our panelists today for a fabulous conversation. We've learned a lot. I am incredibly grateful that you are all where you are, doing the good work that you are on behalf of all of us. And now I would like to turn over our discussion to Dean Grady.
Thanks to all of you for a very enlightening discussion about this topic, which is an extremely important topic. Andrea, Elida, and Olaf, thank you for joining us today. Your expertise is invaluable, and your professional success is a shining example for all of our students and alumni at the Brandeis International Business School. So thank you. And to our moderator, Professor Bowie, thank you so much for leading today's conversation, for your leadership, and for your continued efforts to advance our mission at the International Business School. It's great working with you. We have one more event to tell you about in this year's Trends in Asset Management series. On April 14th at noon, we will be hosting a timely panel on environmental investing, featuring several leaders in the field. This event will be moderated by Brandeis alumnus and Asset Management Council member Rob Brown. This event is part of our Business of Climate Change initiative and will be co-presented by the Rosenberg Institute for Global Finance. Finally, all of you will soon receive an email asking you what you thought about today's event. Please take the time to share your thoughts with us as we plan for the future. Next week, a recording of today's session will be available online at our Trends in Asset Management website. The URL will be included in the chat. Thank you again for supporting Brandeis, and I hope to see you soon. Have a great day to everyone.